So this tale begins all the way back in the month of June in the year 1968, where the French government conducts a nuclear test in French Polynesia, exposing an iguana nest to a massive radioactive fallout. Fast forward in time, some 30 years pass by, and now we see a Japanese factory ship in the South Pacific being attacked by something that seems to be a monstrous beast, leaving just a single survivor in the aftermath. The next evening, a Frenchman questions the surviving elder guy, who's been admitted to a hospital, about what he saw and what really went down in the ocean. However, because of experiencing such a terrible and horrific monster, all the man could respond was, "Gojira." Moving on to the next scene, we're now introduced to Dr. Nick Tatopoulos, a biologist with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, who spent nearly 3 years studying the effects of radiation on earthworms in the Chernobyl exclusion zone in Ukraine. However, after the arrival of a U.S. State Department representative, just around that time, Nick is reassigned and led by the military to Panama in order to examine the trail of damage left behind by an unknown creature. Then to Jamaica to explore a severely damaged ship on its shores. There, a Frenchman, who introduces himself as Philippe Roche, is present at the scene as well, and he tells the U.S. delegation that he's an insurance agent. Colonel Hicks gets briefed on 3 ships being dragged beneath the waters while flying in a military plane. Because of its size and the claw marks found previously, scientist Elsie Chapman hypothesizes that the creature is a descendant of theropod dinosaurs. Nick, on the other hand, believes it's much more likely that it's a mutant species generated by nuclear experiments in French Polynesia, near where it was initially sighted. Meanwhile, the monster appears before anyone expects to see it in New York City, out of all places, and starts to destroy just about anything in its path, be it humans, houses, shops, or vehicles. Seeing the terrifying creature raising chaos and destruction in its wake, the residents of New York are left in fear and confusion because no one expected this uninvited guest to pop up and raise hell all over the city. Now, because of this, the military is deployed and Nick tags along. He then proposes a strategy to lure the creature out with fish, which they all agree to follow. Thankfully, the plot is a grand success as the creature does appear at Flatiron Square and begins feeding on the fish. However, as the military fires, the abominable monster manages to avoid all attacks and vanishes. Following this, Nick gets a blood sample of the dinosaur-like being and analyzes it in his temporary military tent. But what he discovers raises even bigger concerns for the military, and that's because the creature is pregnant, and assuming that it's the first of its type, it must be capable of asexual reproduction. Moving ahead of this tense scene, we now move to the part where Nick comes across his ex-girlfriend, Audrey Timmons, and after running across her, who was an administrative assistant wanting to become a news reporter, Nick shares this discovery with her. And while Nick is focused on experimenting his theory, Audrey looks around and discovers classified video records about the monster's origins. Being who she was, she's fascinated by this and even decides that this is her greatest chance at becoming a news reporter. So she takes them and films a report before handing it off to the media. However, when it airs, she notices that her superior, Charles Kamen, claims it as his own finding and records over her bits, while mispronouncing Gojira as Godzilla. Following this, poor Nick is obviously fired off the squad after the report airs due to his apparent irresponsibility. After this mess-up, he's forced to leave the team, but shortly after, Nick is then kidnapped by Philippe Roche, who isn't actually an insurance agent, but rather a French Secret Service agent, who explains to Nick that the U.S. administration is not interested in discovering the supposed nest, while the French want to cover up any involvement that they had in Godzilla's development. They even suspect that Godzilla's, or rather Zilla's, next step is inside the city itself and starts locating it within the city with Nick's help. On the other hand, rising to the surface once more, Godzilla escapes all military attacks and dives into the Hudson River, where he appears to be slain after crashing with nuclear submarine torpedoes fired at him. The U.S. military are then seen rejoicing and celebrating their triumph over the giant monster. Meanwhile, Roche's team begins the nests search underneath subway tunnels and enters Madison Square Garden, where they uncover over 200 eggs while being discreetly observed by Audrey. Roche and Nick then start cooking a plan as to how they can destroy Godzilla's eggs. However, before they can even start destroying any eggs, they all begin hatching, and the babies proceed to chase the human intruders as they're all hungry for food. So all that's left is to run for their lives, which they all do. After which, Nick, Audrey, Animal, and Roche conceal themselves in the stadium's broadcast booth, and in order to keep the baby Godzillas from causing further destruction, they decide to send a live news report. The military is alerted to the broadcast and responds with an airstrike.